This is the Tame Aperture podcast.
Open the pod bay doors, Cal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we talk all things movies from first-time directors, indie, art house, and much, much more. Today on the podcast, we talk the 2015 directorial debut, Bone Tomahawk, from filmmaker S. Craig Zahler, starring Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Mathew Fox, and Lily Simmons. During the turn of the 19th century, even the Old West is changing, maybe even dying. But the elderly Sheriff Hunt, played by Kurt Russell, holds on to his Old West ways after his town's doctor, Samantha, is kidnapped at the hands of cannibalistic cave dwellers known as troglodytes. The sheriff, alongside Samantha's crippled husband, Arthur, Old Man Chicory, and the gunslinging hustler, Bruder, set off to rescue Samantha and Deputy Nick from the enigmatic and savage cave dwellers. What follows is a journey into hell. I'm Gabe Vienendahl, filmmaker, film instructor, and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined by co-host and veteran podcaster and editor, Alan Martindale. Alan, how the hell are you today?
Oh, dude, it's Bone Tomahawk Day. I'm so happy. I love this movie so much.
This was your pick.
This is my pick. I love it and I've seen it, this is the third time I've seen it. Every time I love something new about it. So I know when you give your grading at the end, you always take into account rewatchability. Well, this is like, this movie, I get something new out of it every single time.
It's got the layers.
It does. It really does. It really does. I love this movie so much.
Well, I can't say that the first 20 minutes I was overly thrilled to be watching the film.
Not even with Sid Haig?
No.
Oh, dude, Sid Haig. The first time I saw this,
he was great. He feels like an old prospector.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it works.
And he, when I saw him the first time, I was so pissed off that they killed him off so early that I was like it took me about half the movie before I kind of got over it, because I love Sid Haig so much. Like, Captain Spaulding is one of the best characters in all of horror. From House of a Thousand Corpses, he is so good, and also from The Devil's Rejects. But
these are definitely your horror enthusiast biases coming into play.
100%,
and that's okay. That's okay.
I'm not even ashamed of it at all. Like, it is 100% for real.
I mean, he's great. He's the old prospector at the beginning of the film. He definitely keeps it light, keeps it fun. He's a great actor. I mean, he does a great job. But beyond that, and I'll give you that. I'll give you the little bit of, okay, that first little bit with Sid in it, there's some charisma. Mm-hmm. But that first 20 minutes, it's hard to swallow, because I actually enjoy traditional Westerns, right? If you look, and that's how it starts to me, which is, it feels very traditionalist, very John Ford, very 1940s Stagecoach.
Yep.
Like, it's just introducing these different types of stereotypical Western characters.
Right.
And that's okay. But for some reason, I just wasn't getting behind it in that first little bit.
That's interesting, because to me, that kind of I guess that makes sense, because, well, let's say this. David Arquette, actually, I was surprised how much I liked his performance, because I see him and immediately I'm thinking, oh, God, but he actually, I thought he was really good in the short, time he was on screen. I thought he was really good.
After you watch the film all the way through, you start to realize, I mean, I always think of David Arquette primarily as Scream.
Totally. And I'm sure, I think he and Sid Haig, I think that's a nod to horror fans. I don't know.
That's what I was alluding. Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was alluding to, like, because at the beginning of the film, this is a hybrid. You start going, okay, this is a Western traditionally, and then things change, and they change a complete direction, 180, and you start going, this is not just a Western, this is a horror film as well.
Right. Well, I think they set that up. The thing I like about this is it's very much a Western. I love Westerns. Like, Tombstone is one of my favorite movies. I love just kind of the campy, traditional Westerns. But this one, it almost like it took all the glamour and the romanticism out of the Western. Like usually when you're watching a Western and they go into a saloon, it's hopping, the music's playing, you got the girls, you got people playing poker. And in this one, you go in and it's just silence. And it's depressing. And I think they take all the glamour out of the Western and it almost makes it a little bit more realistic too.
Yeah, it definitely has an authenticity to it.
Yeah.
It's not popped up. I mean, there are other, Tombstone probably has a little bit more of that in it, but there's other ones too. Look, the Western genre is really quite interesting because, and I'm with you, I actually like Westerns. And I like primarily, I'm kind of a spaghetti Western guy, and I like a lot of the Sergio Leone stuff with Clint Eastwood. I have Fistful of Dollars hanging in this office right now as a poster because I like that kind of stuff. Where it's always kind of style over substance, really. There's not a whole lot of going on in the storyline. Or at least it's very basic. And then the style and the way that techniques that it's shot in is kind of fun and kind of different. But storylines in Westerns are always pretty basic. There's not any kind of, huge deviation. I think one that comes to mind is a Clint Eastwood when you think about something like Unforgiven.
Oh,
where fantastic film. Complete anti-hero, and it kind of flips the Western in a different direction. Because I think a lot of, if you look at for me, you look at Westerns historically, they're kind of set up as, and they were a huge part of Hollywood too. Like you look at the 20s to the 40s or the 50s, and Westerns were like a quarter of the films or more being made. They kind of dominated what was being released. And they did kind of have an evolution, where you had the hero, the John Wayne-esque type hero. Even in his later films, he becomes somewhat of an anti-hero. But it kind of evolves from traditional Westerns where they're kind of going out and crossing the frontier and getting into the West and trying to, figure things out, into the anti-heroes of something like Unforgiven. And then you get something like this, which is a complete deviation from any of those. It's kind of got its own unique Western value, right?
Definitely, without a doubt. And I kind of like it. It almost lulls you into a false sense of security. And I love films that kind of do that subvert your expectations. I mean, if you want to talk about an extreme version of that, From Dusk Till Dawn, I think does that really well. Like it starts out as a crime thriller and it ends up being a gory vampire movie. And it doesn't do it until about a little over halfway through the movie. And I just love that turn. And this one does it. It's not as abrupt. And I don't want to call it subtle, but it's a little bit more natural in the transition. But it does that, and I just love it. I love it, and you just lulled into this false sense of security. You think that it's a movie about these people trudging through the desert trying to go on a rescue mission, and it just turns into hell on earth.
It's incredibly insane. And so to set it up for those listening, it's basically you have these frontiermen. They're out there somewhere. It's either Texas or New Mexico. And you have, in this case, you do have somewhat of a traditional character with Kurt Russell as kind of like the sheriff of the small town. And he's kind of a hard-nosed, bitter type of individual, right?
Right.
And then you have the newly married couple who's kind of out there on the frontier trying to figure things out in the best way they know how, right? They're kind of cowboys or ranchers. They're just out there doing their thing. And what ends up happening is at the beginning of the opening scene with David Arquette and Sid, hey, you have, they've basically looted or stolen, right? And they're trying to hide this loot or this still that they've got. And it ends up being that Sid dies, like you said, dramatically. You were heartbroken within the first few minutes because he gets taken out. We're not entirely sure by what you would assume what would be American Indians or Native Americans. But then the scene or the story jumps to the small town, and it basically just establishes the relationship between Samantha and Arthur.
Right.
Who are basically the newly married couple. One's a cowboy rancher, and she happens to be the town medicine woman / doctor. And they're just trying to figure things out. And then what ends up happening is David Arquette's character is kind of the catalyst. He's, after his friend's been brutally murdered out in the wilderness, he's kind of stumbled into town with this loot that they had. He hides it. He goes into town. There's suspicion around his character, and Kurt Russell arrives to kind of change the whole direction of the plot.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's just done. Even all the exposition, I loved. Like, I loved when they're trying to explain the relationship between the O'Dwyers, between Patrick Wilson and his wife. I really thought that was sweet. I love how they did it, how he wrote her a love letter. And then also, I mean, what more can you say about Richard Jenkins in this movie? He is so good. I haven't seen him in all of his roles, but of the roles I've seen of him, this is by far the best acting job I've seen him do. And I don't know how he wasn't nominated for something for this, other than the fact that this is probably a horror movie, and the Academy doesn't like to reward horror movies very often. But his character and the way he played it was so good. It's hard to believe he's the same guy that's in all these other movies, like Cabin in the Woods. And I mean, if you look at his IMDb, it's extensive list.
Yeah,
but
he's in a lot of
his
stuff.
Acting job, that was my favorite performance in this whole film.
He's fantastic. His character's name's Chicory. And he's this old kind of, I don't want to say, he's not an old curmudgeon. He's just an old man, basically.
And he just wants to do good in the world. Like
he's the opposite of a curmudgeon. He's very nice and sympathetic, and he's lost his wife, and he's trying to figure it out and help people out. He has a good heart.
And it feels like Kurt Russell, who plays the sheriff, kind of gave him the title of assistant deputy just to kind of make him feel good, because he wants to be useful, but he's way past his prime. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. He's not the smartest guy, but he just wants to help. And I think this was a way of kind of pacifying him a little bit, not really thinking that it would ever come to anything.
Yeah.
And he ends up playing a huge role in this rescue mission and the whole story. And everything about that character I love. It was done so well.
I mean, I always revert. I mean, like you said, his IMDb is quite extensive, and I always revert to Step Brothers because that's how I think of him, right? Where he's the stepfather to Will Ferrell, and he's great in that too. In a comedic way, he's just really good at it. But
it just shows his range. It's so deep.
Because that's a pretty big spectrum to cross. We'll take the one in Step Brothers, for example, where it's this real quirky, campy kind of stepfather to your stepson. And it's not overly complex. It's not an especially deep character necessarily.
Right.
Fun and funny. Always kind of mad and upset with the boys because they're too old to, well, you know the story. But I think the spectrum, you look at something like Chicory, I mean, it shows his ability as an actor to really spread himself out.
Yeah, so I mean, and back to my original point, I liked the development of the relationship between he and the sheriff, and how they show that he really idolizes the sheriff from the get-go. And so even all this exposition and setting us up to understand what's going on, I even enjoyed that. A lot of the time I'll kind of roll my eyes, and I get the sense from you that these are the parts that you were losing it a little bit.
Yeah, it was a little bit slow for me, which I find ironic, mentioning that I do like Westerns, and typically Westerns, as we know, they're just slow in general. So You would think that I would be a little bit more patient with it. But I think my expectations, I just think the name alone it kind of insinuates, I don't want to say violence, but it does insinuate some kind of action. You think about Tomahawk, or you think like that kind of stuff, you think it's going to really get going very quickly. And it didn't initially, and so I was a little bit put off.
But the movie, it does warn you from the very first shot, because that very first shot is brutal. It's true. David Arquette slicing that guy's throat open, so you know it's going to be rough. Like, you're going to see some stuff, but there's a big lull in between, almost to kind of lull you to sleep a little bit and make you forget what's happening here.
But you'll wake up.
Oh, you'll wake up, man. You'll wake up.
I wanted to talk. You brought something up about Chicory, and specifically, you're talking about that performance and how well it was done, and how Richard Jenkins did such a great job, and I agree with all of that. I thought he was fantastic. On the opposite side of that, I actually had a really hard time with Patrick Wilson.
Interesting. Huh.
I don't know. Here's the thing about Patrick Wilson, Alan. I don't know all his films, and he's probably a fine actor. But everything that I can think that he's in, he just annoys the fuck out of me.
I can see what you're saying. And
I don't know why. Like, he's not bad necessarily. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm not watching the performance going, wow, that's really... And I'm not, of course, an actor. I don't know anything. But I just mean something about him. One of the ones that I remember watching a few years back is The Conjuring.
Yeah. That immediately where my brain goes when I think of Patrick Wilson.
And I just didn't... There's something about him that I kind of want to slap the taste out of his mouth.
He's got a little smugness going on. He definitely does.
It kind of is.
But it's almost like a smugness, but he also wants to play the nice guy. But you can see that smugness just barely below the surface.
I think you nailed it. I think you hit it on the head. And maybe that's what it is. And I remember seeing the worst film of 2018, which he's also in, which is called Aquaman.
I haven't even seen it. Worst film of 2018.
Worst film of 2018. Then I rent it for my boys who are 7 and 9. They love it.
Of course they do.
So then I love it because I get excited. Well, here's the deal, right? When they are genuinely excited and interested in the movie, then it kind of excites me, right? Naturally, as a dad, that's how we are, right?
For sure.
But nonetheless, if I was to extrapolate that and just not have that as part of the equation, then Aquaman was the worst film of 2018.
That's a bold statement too.
I went, it's not though. We should probably pull up the 2018 films at some point and figure out what was released and see what can be as bad as Aquaman.
See, I just don't see a lot of those superhero movies, and it's not necessarily because I don't like them. I just don't really have a whole lot of interest. They're all kind of the same to me. You're going to get the same story. You're going to get the same villains that I'm not invested in and I'm not worried about and I'm not scared of. And then they're going to save the day at the end.
Well, here's the tie-in, because later watching Bone Tomahawk, I saw Patrick Wilson, and then I went, that's why Aquaman's the worst, because Patrick Wilson bugs the hell out of me. He just bugs the hell out of me. I don't know what it is. But which is he's probably obviously it's not a personal hit, right? I'm not a guy that wants to dive into any of that. I have nothing against Patrick Wilson. There's just something about his acting that pops me and makes me kind of annoyed, basically.
I can see that. In fact, for him, he's not spectacular when he's just playing a husband. The part that I really liked him in this movie is when the determination to get to his wife. And I liked that a lot. I liked the rescue mission. I don't know. I just his one-track mind, nothing else matters, come hell or high water, I'm going to go rescue her. I liked that. I thought that was pretty cool. Other than that, though, I mean, he is, I'm not going to say his performance was weak, but it was the weakest performance in the film. I
think I'll attribute what you're saying to the writing. I think the character's interesting because it's a one-track mind character. So to give Patrick Wilson a little bit of leeway and a little bit of buffer room, I will say that I imagine that in some regard, when characters aren't overly complex, right? There's no complexity to the character. The character is straightforward. He's an old-time cowboy, like real cowboy, and he's determined. And the only it's one-track mind. So I'm going to go and save my wife. So that's a good trait, right? And I agree with you. As a character, that makes sense, especially for this film. But it's not overly complex, so it might be hard as an actor to play that one-track mind character, right? Because there's no complexity to it.
Sure.
So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt.
That's very kind of you.
I'm retracting my shitty statements about him and trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I think his character is, of course, integral to the story, and I think he does a good job. And it's not a shitty performance; it's just not my favorite. And so we can move on off Patrick Wilson if you want.
So how about Mathew Fox?
Once again, it's interesting how we judge and survey things, because it's all somewhat based on previous experiences.
Absolutely.
Or our own perceptions. Because I love Lost. Yeah. Like, so immediately, if you think Mathew Fox, you immediately think Jack Shephard from the TV series Lost.
Right.
I loved the TV series Lost. I thought it was a great series. I don't know what it is. We've talked about this before. Sometimes you can't explain everything. But what I can say is I just loved it. I thought it was a great TV series.
Absolutely.
And so for me, I loved him. I thought he was great. But here's the deal. His character's got a little more complexity to him because there's a form of retribution, right? And he doesn't initially introduce that. And that's what I like what Zahler, the director, does, is that like he doesn't introduce that character's motivation initially. So there's a curiosity, right? You're like, okay, who's this guy? Why is he so interested in wanting to save Samantha? You know, why is he? Is he doing this out of the good nature of his heart?
Because the reason he gives is very flimsy at best. Where he's like, I escorted her to the police station, so I have a duty. It's like, that's pretty flimsy, man, to go out and you've already talked about how many, you've killed so many Indians. Like, I'm not, something's going on here.
See, I think I must have missed that in the dialogue, because I actually thought he didn't bring up that. Oh, no. I'm retracting. I'm sorry. You're right. I was giving away why his motivation. He has, he's already talked about how he's killed whatever dozens of Indians.
Right.
But we don't know his motivation until a bit later when he reveals that his family was murdered. Right.
Right.
And that when he was a young boy, his wife, or not his wife, I mean, his sister and his mother. And that's kind of the motivation to him. But and that's even not overly, I mean, that's pretty simple and plain, and it makes sense. So, okay, that's why he's got such a vindication and wants to, have such hard retribution on these. But I don't know, I think building the curiosity of him, and I like his performance in general. I didn't think, here's the other thing. Watching other movies that he's been in, and especially the TV series Lost, I didn't ever think he could pull it off.
And that's the thing I liked most about this, is because I can't remember what else I've even seen him in other than Lost.
The only movie immediately that comes to mind is the one with Denzel Washington. Is it with Denzel Washington? Damn it. No, I just went blank too. But anyway.
I'll pull up his IMDb.
Yeah, pull that up. Because
for me,
I thought he pulled it off, though.
Oh, exactly. And that's the thing is, like you said, you see him and you think Jack Shephard from Lost. Like, I almost called him Mathew Shepherd, like, although that's a much different person. But I almost called him that because that's who he is to me. He's Jack Shephard from Lost. He's the good guy, the good guy who's got some demons and is conflicted, but he is the savior of the show. He's a protagonist. So to see him play an arrogant son of a bitch who is, and I emphasize arrogant because he's very arrogant and he's an ass, but then somehow along the way you side with him, to me, that takes skill to be able to do that, because he's still Mathew Fox, but he played it so convincingly and so well that I didn't like him at first. And then as Chicory and Kurt Russell, just as they kind of get to know him and they get to have a little sympathy for him, we as the audience do too. And this is what I think this film does so well, is that it really does put you in the character's shoes. Like it lets you know that this from the get-go that the movie's going to be, it's going to be rough at points, but then it immediately puts you in this world of this town. There's very little score in this movie. There's very little I don't want to call it distraction, but there's not many outside elements that are going to remind you it's a film. The sound design is so good. And I always believe that the sound design kind of makes it real. if that makes sense. Like if sound design is done very well, you feel like you're part of the movie, and that's what this film did. So you really feel like you're the characters. You're going on this journey with them, and when hell is unleashed, man, you feel it. Like it takes you by surprise, even though you knew it was going to be bloody. Even though they told you from the beginning, it still takes you by surprise, and you're in a whole other world. This is not the world we were in 5 minutes ago, basically.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point because, we talk once again about Westerns, and a lot of times Westerns are really based in atmosphere, and they're really based in that environment and feeling like it's the Old West or the frontier. And I do agree with you that in this film, it's much, much more character driven, and the atmosphere and the environment really plays a secondary role to just following what the story is with these characters. And so, yeah, I agree with you there. And I think Matthew Fox pulls it off and makes that character. I like what you said about the switch too, because initially you kind of think that he's just an ass. Mm-hmm. And then kind of towards the end, especially as he nearly, spoiler alert, as he nearly meets his demise, you really sympathize and you really start to enjoy it. You kind of side with that character even more than before.
Well, there was something when he hands the telescope over to Chicory. That's when you're fully invested in his character. That's when you're like, okay. It starts when his horse gets mangled or whatever, and he has to go shoot it to put it out of its misery. That's when you start to feel sympathy for him. But it's really like you're on board with him once he hands over. They call it the German, the telescope, because it's from Germany. Once he hands that over to Chicory, you're on. It's like, all right, he's part of the crew. Like, I like him. Like, yeah. he has pulled a 180, and that's hard to do. That's hard to take a character who's so unlikable, and within the scope of 90 minutes, turn him into someone you like. Like, that's not easy to do.
Absolutely. Let's go. Let's jump in. By the way. Matthew Fox was the one I was thinking of was not with Denzel, but it's a football film called We Are Marshall, and it stars Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew Fox plays an assistant coach.
Okay, I haven't seen that. I've actually heard great things, but I haven't seen it.
It's the Marshall University. But anyway, and then he's in Party of Five, which was
I do remember that
pretty popular TV series as well.
I remember I was a kid when that came out, so I do remember that though.
But I liked this performance. I thought he was really good. I'd like to see more of him. As I was looking at his IMDb, the last credit that he has in a film or a TV series is 2015 Bone Tomahawk.
I wonder why.
So he's just rich, and he'd probably he seems like a guy that kind of does what he wants.
True.
He got that lost money, and he's like, I'll do whatever I want to do now.
Well, and I mean, I was going to save this for the trivia section, but he did say that this was his favorite movie to work on. So maybe he's like, all right, don't need any more. I'll take a break now.
Yeah, I'll take a 5-year hiatus.
Yeah, exactly.
Resting on my lost money.
Might as well.
That lost money has to feel good.
It's got to. Because, I mean, I imagine it's in syndication.
Oh, so it's in syndication.
For that. Yeah, so yeah. Royalties for that, too. So.
And they were getting a hell of a lot of money. I remember this being in the news frequently, and I don't know the numbers. We could find them out eventually, but they were getting a lot per episode, too. It was record-breaking numbers per episode, if I recall. So he's cool. He's good. He's all right.
Underrated, though, for sure.
I think so. I really do. That's what I mean. I'd really like to see him in more stuff. But if you're listening to the podcast, Matthew Fox, come and do some films. Let's go.
Seriously, man. I'm craving more Matthew Fox after this one.
Where you at, Jack? Where you at? Now let's talk a little bit about someone who is not at a lack of films, which is Kurt Russell.
Now, Kurt Russell, and this is interesting because I feel like Kurt Russell, it was a very strong character. The sheriff, what was his name? Sheriff something.
I feel like I saw him like 100 times before.
But exactly, Sheriff Hunt. It's Kurt Russell, like it's still Kurt Russell. This is Wyatt Earp from Tombstone. It's the same. He's played this role a million times, but he still gives it a new life. and I still enjoy watching it. It's not like it's boring, but it's not revolutionary.
No, but I think a lot of, you look at his body of work and you start going, he's that actor that's, like you mentioned, he's good. I like Kurt Russell, but he's Kurt Russell. So
Exactly. Yep.
Even in I recall Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's the most recent one I've seen him in. He's just Kurt Russell. He's not that character.
The only one I could say I think he's different is in Escape from New York.
Yeah, a little, yeah. Because even, I don't know, I mean, you look at something like Death Proof or, I just feel like mostly he's a personality actor, which is his personality is Kurt Russell and that's who he is. Like one of my favorite films, we should do a podcast on this one, is Big Trouble in Little China. And
you know what? I haven't seen that since I was a wee lad.
Oh my gosh, it's
been a minute.
It's more nostalgia out of anything, I would say.
Sure.
But I would love to rewatch it because I loved it when I was a kid. And he's Kurt Russell in that.
Yeah.
So with Bone Tomahawk as Sheriff Hunt, I agree with you. I think he's kind of Wyatt Earp from Tombstone. There's not a whole lot of deviation to the character. Once again, but I think it still works. It's still there because he can, that personality trait that he has, which is like whatever he's doing, even though it's Kurt Russell, it's believable.
Absolutely.
It's like you can sell it and be committed. Like even if there's a confidence and a commitment to what you're doing, then it's believable. And he definitely has that in every role that he takes. So even though I see Kurt Russell with my eyes, I still play into the story like, okay, that's all true and this is happening.
Yeah, no, you're right. He embodies whatever character he's playing, even though it's still Kurt Russell.
It's still
it's the same thing.
That's the hot take for that.
Right, exactly.
It's still Kurt Russell.
Yeah, exactly.
But I did like him, and his character is important to the story. And in the opener, I kind of lead with him because he's got these Old West ways. And if we get back to the moment where David Arquette is kind of coming into town after Sid Haig's been killed by these what you would assume to be Indians, David Arquette character comes into town, very suspicious. Kurt Russell comes into the saloon and things go haywire, things get a little crazy, and he shoots David Arquette in the leg. So he's definitely old school West guy,
and this is not
old West.
Not the first time he's done it either.
Exactly. Because
Mrs. O'Dwyer, the doctor, who's basically the town doctor because the real doctor is a drunk, essentially. So she's kind of taken that role, and she mentions that this is not the first time he's done this. He has a tendency to shoot people in the leg.
So he shoots David Arquette's character in the leg and takes him to the jail. And at that point, this is where Bruder, who's played by Matthew Fox, goes to the O'Dwyer's house, right, and asks for Samantha or Mrs. O'Dwyer to come help David Arquette character in the jail. And she knows immediately, that the sheriff shot him, and this is not a new thing.
Right.
She goes to the jail basically and helps him, helps him out. And Kurt Russell leaves. It's late at night. Everybody leaves except for Deputy Nick, who is with Mrs. O'Dwyer. And then we want to say that Patrick Wilson's character Arthur is crippled. He's been injured, so he can't walk. One of his legs is basically he's torn it up. He fell off a shed or something, or some crazy thing that you do in the 1890s. Where like if you fall out, there's no modern medicine. You can't just start.
Right.
Like, you got to sit in bed for 6 months for a torn shin.
Yeah. Because
you're afraid of gangrene. But he's crippled in bed, and there's this is where there's an introduction. It starts to really show some of its, I think at least, when the troglodytes come that night and basically break in and kidnap Deputy Nick and Mrs. O'Dwyer. And before they do that, they've innocently slain a young man as well.
Yeah, the stable boy. And I actually, this is this is again the film is trying to hint that this is going to be a horror movie, because that is the scene where the stable boy comes in and it's very dark. It's very, very horror. Like, it's suspenseful and scary. And so the movie's trying to let you know this is going to happen. I really like that they did not show the abduction in the police station, because again, it's making you feel like you are a part of the journey for this thing. Because if you would have seen it, I think it would have been good, and I'm sure they would have done it well, but it wouldn't have been the same movie. It would have been more of a typical by the numbers horror flick. And I like that they didn't. It also keeps the villains as a mystery, because you don't know. All we're doing is we're seeing little shadows of them, and we're seeing them out of nowhere firing arrows and firing axes, and we don't know where it's coming from. It makes them more scary. So I really like that they did not show the abduction.
Yeah, that's like a partly a traditional horror thing too, and I agree with you, which is like, let's keep in that scene where the stable boy dies, you see shadows and you see various, but nothing definitive. So you're still kind of trying to put together who this villain or this monster is. That's very horror-esque. Sometimes in the beginning, it's like you're not quite sure who it is or what it is, with the exception of your favorite, which is Texas Chainsaw. And Leatherface just comes out and says, "Here I am." But
and then he's gone again.
Then he's gone.
Like, what the hell is that?
But a lot of time, it's kind of more mystery built to it.
Right.
You know, and you're right. And I agree. I think if you show Mrs. O'Dwyer and Deputy Nick being kidnapped from the jail, it kind of breaks the curiosity and the interest going forward. It's almost like not entirely knowing who took them, but you do. I mean, they define it later, right? Where they put two and two together and they discover who it was, but not knowing exactly who they are kind of builds that level of interest. And that's where things start to get more exciting for me.
Definitely. And I also think if you show the abduction, then you're preparing the audience for what's going to happen later. Like, you're preparing them for the scene, and I'll just refer to it as that until we get to it. The scene in the cave later on. Like, you're
Wait, what happened in the cave?
Oh, you missed that part? Did you triple F that one?
No, I watched that one. I watched that.
Yeah. But then you're preparing them a little bit more. And like I said, you're lulled to sleep a little bit. Like, it's a long journey to get to the part where all hell breaks loose. And so I kind of think to keep that, to keep the audience unprepared for what you're going to see later, I think that's part of the deal, is you don't show the abduction.
Yeah, I agree. If you show the abduction, you reveal your cards. You show your hand.
Exactly. Yep. I agree.
They are kidnapped, and this is where Mr. O'Dwyer, Patrick Wilson, Arthur, whatever you want to call him, he's got 3 names there. He's determined, and they rouse together a party of 4, and the party of 4 is the sheriff, of course, Chicory, who's played the Richard Jenkins. Is it Richard Jenkins?
Yes.
Did I just say his name wrong? Oh, okay.
Nope, you got it.
Couldn't remember if I got his name wrong. Chicory, Bruder, played by Mathew Fox, and then of course Arthur. So they set off on basically, this seems back to a sense of like borrowing from Westerns, which is like we're off on a journey. Because most Westerns that I watch, despite what they are, at some point there's always a journey from location A to location B. Like, even take something like Tombstone. Once Wyatt Earp his brother's killed, and they go off on a journey just catching up with the cowboys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like he borrows nicely here from that Western genre. And the journey's a little bit long. And it's introduced, we are told that initially they thought it was Native Americans. They thought it was Indians. But they bring in their specialist, and he says, these are not Indians.
Because the specialist, he actually is a Native American.
Right.
And he's like, these are not, like, they're not my people. Like, these are something else.
This is a whole different, And
Troglodytes.
He calls them troglodytes, which are basically like hermit-dwelling or cave dwellers.
Cave dwellers, yeah. And he mentions they don't have a language, and he talks about how brutal. And they said, "Well, you're going to come with us?" He's like, "No." And I can't remember what was said, but he said, "I don't want to be killed." I mean, so you know it's bad when the expert on the Native Americans is terrified of these people.
Yep. And they head off, and the journey's long, and there's things that happen, and I don't know if there's anything between the time they leave to the time that they actually get to the caves that seems overly crucial. What to you in that gap of time is important to talk about?
They lose their horses. You also you see what an expert Matthew Fox's character, I can't remember his name, Brooder. Yeah, Brooder. Yeah. You see what an expert Brooder is about, being out in the frontier, and the way he sets up camp, and the way he's able to ascertain threats. And it seems brutal. Like, it seems his strategy with anyone who approaches the camp, shoot. Because it's either going to be an animal or it's going to be someone who wishes them harm, because no one would approach a camp in the middle of the night without announcing themselves first. So, and it makes sense, but until it actually happens and he kills this guy who does approach their camp, you find out later that he was absolutely right. But this is part of building his character as unlikable, because he kills this guy in cold blood.
Yeah.
He kills him straight up in cold blood, and you're thinking, holy shit, what an ass. Like, this guy did not seem to be a threat, but it turns out he was absolutely right. That the guy was a scout, and he was coming to scout them out, basically. So, I mean, those are the main things. And then the fact that they lose their horses because whoever the people the scout was with came back in the middle of the night and stole their horses. Those are the main incidents that happened during the journey. So my question for you, though, was, during this journey, it's long, and like you said, not a whole lot happens. Were you bored?
I want to answer that question, but I also want to say something about Brooder that I think you were nicely alluding to. And one of the things that makes him an extreme, besides kind of coming across extremely egotistical, he also, I think that Zahler, the director, does a good job dressing him like a pompous ass.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, everyone else is very rugged and cowboy. Yep. And Brooder somehow has thousands and millions of dollars because he dresses high end.
And he's got this fancy equipment, and but it's interesting because he does dress super high end, and he dresses like a upper class person, but he does have all this experience in the wilderness and in the frontier. So it is interesting. It's a weird dichotomy.
Yeah, it's a cool contrast to see.
Yeah.
In answer to your question, I wasn't bored, right? I was still. It's one of those things where there's enough interest for me to kind of stay in it. Like, there are times when we watch things, and I'm sure you experience this when you watch something, that I have a pretty good threshold for patience. Like, I let stories unfold. So, like, understanding narrative and at least trying to attempt to be a filmmaker and do things that have to do with storytelling. Like, you know how it is. Like, you have a set of patience to it, right? Mm-hmm. You let things kind of unravel as they may without becoming overly impatient. So I did that. And there are some moments where I wanted it to kind of move ahead. What I found, there is an integral part too that I think we should highlight in that gap from the time they leave the town to the time they get to the caves, where Patrick Wilson, his character, because they've lost the horses, like you mentioned, of course, he's crippled. And so they have to kind of separate from him because he can't keep up with the other three, of course, because he's got a cane or a crutch. And so he has to go off on his own. And he takes the lead, and then they catch up to him, and then they pass him. And so before they get to the caves, it's just the three of them, and his character is well behind. and it's his wife that's the one that's at the cave. And he's on the verge of he's passed out at some point. He's sick. They don't think he can go on. They're thinking about having to amputate his leg.
Because he hurts it worse.
He hurts
it worse.
Swing
at Mathew Fox.
Yeah. They're trying to give him opium or some kind of, pain medication. But the one thing is to mention is they get separated, right? So the three of them get ahead of him. And that becomes crucial later because that's how shit goes down.
Right. It's crucial. It is important to note that because, we'll get to that. It is important to note that he's hanging on behind, and he's determined.
And that once again, that's sometimes I think of similar characters, like who would be. I like those kind of characters who are, like we already talked about, who are the single track mind. And I think we've even mentioned this once before, but sometimes I'm glad they didn't take too much time showing him struggle. Like you see a little bit of struggle and you know that he's having a hard time, but they didn't make a huge story out of it.
They didn't beat you over the head with it.
No.
They let you know that this is a daunting task, what he's doing, but they didn't beat you over the head with it.
But they didn't kill it. Because if they could have spent, if they had started, this is where I'd have got bored if they were taking that storyline and just pounding it down over and over for 20 minutes. But fortunately, they don't really do that. I don't think they did. And so that was nice. The three of them arrive at the caves. So Bruder, Mathew Fox, Kurt Russell, and Richard Jenkins, Chicory, they arrive at these caves. Before they get there, though, you start hearing these shrieking noises.
It is so creepy. And this is where I talk about the sound design, because the sound that they came up with for these sounds, it's close enough to a natural thing that it's almost like the wind at times. It's almost like an animal call at times, but it's unnatural. It gives me the chills.
It's got the wind, maybe an animal / predator.
Yes.
It's got that almost, which is alien. It's different. It's not of this world. It doesn't feel that way, at least.
Right.
And
it's just unnatural enough to unnerve you.
Yeah. I thought those were really well done. But you start hearing these, and it's basically a sign of things to come, and it's going to start going down.
It almost sounds like, I mean, obviously, the natural comparison is to compare where they end up as going into hell, like going into the depths of hell. And it almost is like it's almost like the hounds of hell or something. You're hearing it get closer and closer. And it's just unnerving because we've seen these people in action, even though we haven't seen them. We've seen what they do to people. We have heard the expert talk about these people. And we don't know what to expect. So it's scary. It's super, super scary.
Yeah, absolutely. And they kind of arrive at this canyon, which is like almost like an entrance to their realm.
It feels like the gates of hell. It really does.
And it really is. I mean, if you think about the physical environment, which is basically like you're entering into a cave, which is moving into the center of the earth, quote unquote, like it's very hellish that way too. But they get there, and this is where things start to pick up a little bit, and we start to experience a few more deaths. And there's a little bit of a shootout between Bruder and these cave dwellers, these troglodytes. And this is where Bruder gets, once again, you kind of start to like his character even more. And he kind of takes the lead. And then as he's walking into this, I would say, death trap, basically.
No doubt. No doubt.
He's still pretty ballsy, pretty courageous.
For sure. And I can't decide if he's being arrogant at this point or if he's just being confident, because he has hunted Indians before, so it almost seems like he knows what he's doing. I I can't decide if he's prideful or not, like at this point. And there's definitely some religious symbolism in here. And I don't quite, like I mean, I've said this before. I wasn't raised religious. I'm not religious. So I don't really, a lot of that stuff is over my head, but it does feel like there's some religious stuff there. And I don't know if that plays a part into what happens to him.
Almost felt like his confidence was also like a form of like existentialism. He's like, he just didn't care.
True.
He was at a point now where like he was all in. And it's almost like he knew what his demise was going to happen shortly. Mm-hmm. And so he just didn't care. He's like, I'm going to go all in and do it. So he goes through this tunnel, this canyon, and I guess he ends up killing one. I heard gunshots, but the other two come in after him. And then there's basically a showdown, a little bit of a showdown. And we're kind of introduced to kind of the look and feel of what these troglodytes or cave dwellers are.
And the way they're introduced is interesting too. It's not a big reveal. Basically, they're sitting. Our scouting party, our rescue party is sitting there, and all of a sudden, arrows are flying at them from everywhere. It's like boom, 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 and it just happens so fast. And then here come charging these dudes, like these people, kind of painted white, and it's just like, what the hell? What is going on here? And it's they're scary, but it's so quick. Like there's not a big reveal. There's not any of that. It's just, again, kind of matter of fact. Like it's kind of how you would expect it to happen in real life.
Yeah, and they're kind of, it's almost like it's like dried mud all over their bodies. Mm-hmm. And they have, different ornamental things on their arms, some stuff on their, so, but they're hard to distinguish, right? You can't figure out, they look very animalistic in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
Very, 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 very cave dweller type, right? Not, but Kurt Russell gets hit. Chicory gets nicked. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Brooder, Matthew Fox, gets hit. And he's kind of down. He's down for the count. So he kind of basically takes the lead and says, look, I'm going to give me the dynamite. I'm going to try to take out as many of them as I can so that you guys can continue this mission.
And his line is really good because he knows what people think of him. And he says, this is my spot. I'm way too vain to die a cripple or to live a cripple.
Yeah.
And, he's kind of half joking, but it's just, we should mention this. There's some moments of comedy in this movie too. Usually it's from Chicory, but there's some moments of comedy in this. And I thought that was a cool little moment.
Yeah, that is a great line. And it's fitting to his character.
Exactly.
But he tries to take out as many as he can so the other two can proceed into the cave because they have not reached the cave. They're just kind of outside, just below the actual cave. So
one thing I didn't understand though, he didn't set off dynamite though, did he? Because he asked for the dynamite, but I don't remember him setting it off.
See, I thought he did, but maybe I'm just imagining that because that's what I wanted him to do.
I know. Well, and that's what I was waiting for, like an explosion or something. I just don't remember it happening. I remember he shot one or two more before they killed him, before they axed him.
Yeah. They take out a couple more and they axe him like across the head, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, basically it's pretty brutal.
It's a bone tomahawk thrown at him, it's right through the head.
Right. It takes it splices, it dices.
Very effective.
But it does, it kind of saves a little time, but not really. Because ultimately, the sheriff and Chicory get taken over. Now they don't kill him, but
which is interesting. I don't quite understand why they don't kill him.
I think only because they're cannibals. So
okay.
My only thought is that they were saving him to eat him.
Okay.
It would be my
why
guess.
do I love these cannibal movies so much?
I don't know. I'm getting worried.
Between this and Texas Chainsaw, man, I got some issues.
That's true.
I need to see a shrink.
I'm getting worried. Just looking at you through the screen, I'm going, wait, maybe I don't want to do live podcasts anymore.
The safety of the internet, man. That'll keep us apart.
Next thing you know, I'm the one knocked out.
Yeah, exactly.
Alan's eating. But yeah, they don't make it through, and then they get taken over by the troglodytes, and then they take them. They go to the front. The cave's kind of above on a cliff. Actually, it's like lodged on the side of a cliff wall, and they do the crazy call. The crazy.
So yeah, we should kind of explain. Well, I guess it's not revealed how they make this weird animalistic. I don't know what you call it. This call that they do to each other. All we know is it's deafening. It's very, very loud, but we don't quite know exactly how they do it yet.
Yeah. It does kind of build some curiosity because I'm like, how are they doing that? And I started wondering or thinking, this is where, of course, you start to realize that you're in a horror film. You're not just inside of a Western. But I also thought, okay, so are we in another world? Like, is this a world of belief that these are like alien-esque creatures, or are they not human?
And I think that's intentional. I think they want you to keep guessing for a while.
Because you don't know how they're making those screeching noises and all of that. But they do the call sign, and then ropes come down from the cave, and they take the sheriff and Chicory up. They take him up, and they put him inside the cave, inside of a boned off prison. And this is where we realize here that Deputy Nick and Samantha, or Mrs. O'Dwyer, are in the cave, so they're still alive.
Yep.
So we know that their objective's not completely for nothing, because she's still there. And all this time, you kind of know, like, he's got that little bit of that trick up his sleeve as a writer director, because we know that, of course, Arthur, or Patrick Wilson, is still out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you still know, even though everyone's, Matthew Fox is dead, Kurt Russell's in jail, but we know that Patrick Wilson's somewhere out there still. And the one thing about his character that kind of gave me some relief was that he's an old school cowboy.
Yeah,
like he's got the grit.
He's gonna make it. Yeah, he'll come. He might die trying, but he's gonna see his objective out.
He's gonna come in literally guns ablazing.
Yep.
And that's kind of what happens, but not before a couple of pretty gruesome scenes.
Oh, here we go, man. Here we go. This is where it gets nuts.
Because before Patrick Wilson gets there, there's some killings, or a killing, I should say. This is Alan's
Deputy Nick.
favorite part.
Well, first of all, they ask where the drifter is, and Mrs. O'Dwyer says they ate him. So straight up they're cannibals. Like this is the reveal where they're cannibals. And then here comes Deputy Nick is passed out in his jail cell next to and he's in the same cell with Mrs. O'Dwyer. And man, the troglodytes come in, they open up the cell, they pull out Deputy Nick, they strip him naked, and he's basically saying his goodbyes and he sees that the sheriff's there, and he's basically saying his goodbyes, like send my stuff to my brother. And basically, first of all, they slice his forehead and scalp him. And that is brutal, man. And when you see that, you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. It can't get much worse than this. But oh my God, does it get worse. And this, I showed this movie to Jess fairly early on when we were dating, which probably was not very nice of me. But she was kind of dipping her toe into the horror world, and so I was like, all right, well, we watched a couple things. We watched Chainsaw, we watched Night of the Living Dead. It's like, all right, well, let's see how far we can take this. And and she closed her eyes during this, and she said that even the sounds still disturb her. Like, she can still hear the sounds of this. So basically, he's been scalped. They flip him over. Remember, he's butt ass naked. They flip him over. One troglodyte's got one leg, another troglodyte's got the other leg, and the third troglodyte just slicing him from between his legs, slicing him, and then they pull him apart. And when they pull him apart, that's gross enough, but stuff starts falling out of him. And it is one of, I can handle a lot of gore. I love horror movies. This was like this was pushing it for me. This was like, and I've seen this movie twice before, and it's just as bad the third time, where I'm like, oh, that's gross. Oh my God, that's horrible. But it's done so well. Like the practical effects are so good. And again, the sound design, like Jess said, the sounds disturb her. It's the sound design of the whole thing that really makes it disturbing. If you skimp on the sound design in this scene, it is not nearly as gross.
So you're telling the audience that they should mute it, if at least just to subdue the scene a little bit.
Honestly, it's a good experiment, because I would love to know if someone does that and how it affects them when it's muted.
I'll take it a step further. I mean, you could triple F this if you wanted to.
It's probably not a bad idea.
I personally, I was okay with it too. And only because I agree with you from the filmmaker stance. I was like, this is done. I was questioning, how did they do it?
Exactly.
How did they do this so well? It looks so realistic, so authentic. Not that I know what that is like in person, but you can imagine. And I think they painted that visual extremely strong.
They did a great job. There's a show, if anyone out there has Shudder, it's a streaming service that streams horror movies. There's a show called The Core, and it's not a horror show. It's basically a show for horror fans, and they tell you how they do a lot of these effects. They don't explain this one, but if you want to know, if you're interested in practical effects in horror movies, like the old Nightmare on Elm Street movies and stuff like that, go watch that show, because it is fantastic, and it tells you how they do it, and it actually shows you, and it gets all bloody, and it's so cool. If you like this kind of stuff, I would definitely check it out.
I mean, I think for any filmmaker, there's got to be a level of interest in how they do that. I mean, you take a scene like that that's written the way that it is, and then you go, how do we execute on this? And they do it extremely well, and it's brutal. It's brutal.
The part that got me, at first it's like, it's kind of gory fun, but the part that got me is when stuff starts falling out of him as they're tearing him apart.
I was just before you at the point where they had his legs and they started axing down the middle, splitting him.
That's I mean, because it's not just like, in a movie where they cut off someone's head. It's like one swoop. Like they're pounding him with the axe. Like
they're hacking. They're hacking.
Exactly. Well said. They're hacking him.
And I was clenching my ass.
Oh yeah, it's a butt clincher scene for sure.
Because I was like,
no doubt,
it's a scene where you feel it in a sense.
Oh, it's horrible.
So you're wondering, like, oh man, you're kind of crossing your legs. It's tough. It's a tough scene.
There's a movie called Terrifier. It's a terrible horror movie, but if you like horror, it's like dumb fun. And there's a scene where an evil clown is chainsawing a woman in the same manner, but it's not nearly as effective. Like, it's super gory and gross, but it's also like, we know this is a dumb horror movie. This movie just spent an hour and a half showing you how realistic all this stuff is and putting you in this world. And, showing you, the dangers of the frontier life and the dangers of, these troglodytes, but you're just not prepared. You're not prepared for this thing. You're not. It's nothing. It's like they just want you to they want to take you by surprise. It's so crazy just how brutal it gets at the drop of a hat.
And it's, because there's been brutality up to this point, but it's a little more palatable. Whereas here, like we mentioned, it's definitely a butt clincher. And the thing about it too is that it's almost like that's the only direction that Zahler can go, because if you go any, and I don't hate to say this, but if you go any softer, then the point's not as strong.
Exactly.
Because now with Deputy Nick going through this death and torture, this murder scene, at the level that he does, the stakes are so high, higher than you had anticipated, because now you're starting to feel like, okay, they did this to Deputy Nick, so what's to say that who's next? You're just you're putting on the bet. It's like going to Vegas and going, is it Chicory? Is it Minnesota Dwyer? Is it Sheriff Kurt Russell? because you're starting to wonder. It's a guessing game. It's a bet game. Who's next? And it's brutal. It's just it's pretty brutal.
And not only that, every time they come back in the room, you are terrified of what you're going to see next. That's when the horror kicks in. It's not until like the last 20 minutes of this movie where it actually turns into a horror movie.
Yeah. And so he's gone. Deputy Nick's out of there.
Yeah.
Just know, by the way, if you are going to watch the film, and that's fine. Look, I'm not watch the film, but if you don't have a stomach for it, some people might not, right? And if you don't have a stomach for it, as Deputy Nick gets taken out, just you can skip about 30 seconds and you'll be good.
Yeah. If you don't have the stomach for it, it's definitely still a great movie to watch, but just fast forward through that part.
Yeah, you'll get the drift.
You'll get the drift, no doubt.
So, but we have here's the deal. And so even with this dark demising kind of scene, we have a little bit of hope in our back pocket, because here we have Mr. O'Dwyer with his determination to save his wife.
But how the first time you saw this, how hopeful were you that this guy who's hobbling around on one leg is going to manage to get up this cliff, get in there and take out all these monsters? This
is where I kept thinking traditional cowboy. So I knew he was going to win.
Sure.
I really did. I mean, it's like you watch and you go, okay, we've established that he's a hard-nosed, hard-gritted cowboy. So the only way this can go is him saving his wife.
Well, here's what I was thinking. I was thinking that until the brutal, I don't know what you call it, hacking scene. Because once they showed me that, I'm like, okay, all bets are off now. I could not have predicted that was gonna happen. I have no idea. Like, this seems like the type of movie that's going to just end in tragedy.
Yeah,
and they showed us that all bets are off.
No, I actually did not feel that. I honestly felt like, okay, Mr. O'Dwyer's still gonna win because he's taken us to the depths, and the director Zahler has said, look, here's what happens when you mess with these troglodytes, and the only person to save us is the good old boy cowboy. Like, we're gonna follow this traditionalist step into the saving grace. I still felt like it was his for the taking. And it kind of is. It kind of plays out that way, mostly.
For sure.
Because
and he's a religious guy too. They that's one thing we didn't mention. He's a religious guy. Not overly, but he's definitely religious. Like he makes sure to pray, and I think he said Jesus goddamn one time when he was in pain, and he looks up to the sky and says sorry. Like, so he's got faith that's going to work out.
Yeah. And it kind of does, because after Deputy Nick's taken out, they eat him. The sheriff, even at this point, Kurt Russell is like, oh shit.
Yeah.
So
if Kurt Russell's getting worried, we're in a predicament.
Exactly. If Kurt Russell's worried about these people, then they're trying to devise a plan, and they have this tincture, this medicine that if given too much, it can cause an overdose. They have
it's opium, so it's straight up.
It is the opium. Yeah, they have tincture of opium. And so they devise a plan that if we give, they ask Samantha, the doctor, Mrs. O'Dwyer, hey, how much can we try to give these guys to kill one of them? They're starting to devise a plan, which is basically like, how many did we kill? How many have you seen so far, Samantha? She's like, there's about a dozen or so. They had killed, with Matthew Fox's character, like 2 or 3. So they're just trying to devise the numbers, basically. They're running the numbers. And then there's this scene where they try to trick them. So 3 of the troglodytes come in, and you see Kurt Russell pretending to drink the flask of opium, and in trying to entice them to take it. They fall for the bait. They take it. They start trying to drink it, and it ends up killing one of them. Mm-hmm. Out of the 3, right? So now the numbers are slowly dwindling.
And I think the other 2, if I'm not mistaken, the other 2 were going to be passed out.
Yeah, they're out. I don't think they die, but they're out. And so they're breaking the numbers down. And then It's kind of at this point we're getting a little bit of intercutting, a little bit of parallel editing with what's happening in the cave and where Mr. O'Dwyer is in relation to his journey to get there. And like you mentioned, there's some scenes of him suffering and going through pain and figuring it out. He finally gets to the entrance, almost that slot canyon entrance, or at least close, and he leans up against the side of the mountain in the bushes. And then he ends up hearing or taking, he hears one of the troglodytes coming in. He takes them out. He shoots one of them. Mm-hmm. The other one comes running in. He shoots another. So he's taken out a couple now with his pistol.
Right.
He's a dead eye. He's a cowboy. I can believe it. Usually I'm not so forgiving with people being such accurate shots, but because it's old school cowboy, I can take it.
He actually missed a couple times from pretty close range too.
That's true. He does miss.
Because and I think the reason why is because, remember, his leg is hurt. The tincture of opium was for him to dull his pain. So he's been on, and he's supposed to take a spoonful a day. But it's not like, if you've ever taken pain medicine that has, opiates in it, like, you're not off. Like, it makes you tired. And so I think he's not all there when he's trying to shoot it. So I think that's why. But there's an intense scene where there's one troglodyte right near him, and he shoots and misses and shoots and misses. And then he shoots again, and the gun is empty. So now he's got to reload while the troglodyte's standing right there, comes at him with an axe, gets it. Again, any other filmmaker would have had intense music there, would have had, lots of quick cutting. This was done so almost matter-of-factly, so realistically that to me, it added so much to the scare. Because we're in this world where I feel like I'm right there with him. Yeah,
it's extremely visceral. And he comes in and he does end up getting the timing right and ends up taking him out.
Yeah.
But this is where I knew, once again, this alludes to that idea of the traditional, hey, the cowboy in this case is going to win out, where he takes, the odds of him finishing that off before a bone tomahawk hits him in the face is like 1 in a million.
Exactly.
So story-wise, it's fine because that's what we need. But that's again where I was reassuring to go, okay, well, he's going to win out.
But then I'm thinking, because he gets to the slot canyon, like the entrance to hell, essentially, and instead of going through it, he even says, back way. And so to go to the back way, he's got to crawl up this hill. And he's on one leg, and he can barely even crawl up the hill. And then it cuts to him, once he's up the hill, dragging his body. So I'm thinking, how the hell is he going to get up the cliff? How is he going to get up? And they never really show how that happens. So that's one kind of hole in the story that I don't quite understand.
It's what they didn't show you, Alan, was the angel that came down.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Because he's a man of faith. So
that's true.
It took him up the hill.
Good point.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. One thing to say is he's killed about 2 or 3 of the troglodytes. This is also where we discover, am I wrong here? Is this where we discover how they make the screeching noise?
Yes.
Which is basically a piece of bone pipe that they slam into their esophagus or their throats, right?
Yeah.
It's literally embedded into their esophagus.
Yes. It's almost like part of their body. It's strange. I don't know how they get it in there, but it almost is like because he's killed one of the troglodytes and he's cutting it out, and it is like removing a body part.
It's almost like what are they called? The emergency procedure when you have to stick a pipe into the esophagus.
That's what it feels like.
And I can't remember what those are called.
Tracheotomy or something like that.
Thank you. That's exactly what they are. That's what it's almost like with the bone. It's just stuck in there. But somehow they've manipulated it. Now, of course, with the wind of their own lung capacity, it makes this screeching, spooky noise. Mm-hmm. He's killed one of them, and he rips it out. Yeah. He rips it out. And that's also pretty gruesome. In a different way than Deputy Nick, but he rips out the bone pipe, and he realizes that's their communication tool because they don't talk.
No.
So they send signals through this screeching sound, like an animal.
Mm-hmm.
And so he realizes this, and that's how he gets up around the cave. The angel flies in. No, just kidding. Takes him to the.
So we assume that he uses the pipe thing to call to them to send the rope down, but he's not climbing up that rope.
That's what I assumed that he did. So but I think if they tie themselves off and he gets pulled up, right? Like the same way that they pulled up, do they not pull him up or do they climb up? Because they pulled up the deputies.
I would imagine they're gonna throw down the ropes, but then they're gonna look down and see it's not one of them. Not only that, but he's got the pipe thing. So obviously he's cut. I mean, are they gonna let this stranger, this outsider, into their cave?
Oh,
Who's
you're
obviously well
saying.
prepared. Like, to me, it's not a big hole in the story. I can forgive it, but this all could have been solved by just not having the cave up on a cliff.
Damn you, Craig Zahler. Damn
like
you.
It's like the one flaw in this whole story for me.
Now the whole movie's ruined.
It's ruined. I hate it.
The truth
gonna
be
give it a 10,
told,
now
truth
it's
be
getting a
told,
2.
Mr. O'Dwyer's not getting up that cave.
Exactly. But you're right. He had an angel. That's
But-
the only thing that makes sense.
He gets up there somehow. We don't know.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, but
This is me nitpicking.
It doesn't matter, but it's fun.
Yeah, exactly.
He gets up there and then essentially is taking out as many as he can. What's the final scene here in the cave? Run me through it, because it's been established, by the way, that there is a hierarchy to the troglodyte nation or the troglodyte group or tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And the hierarchy is the one with the big tusk
The boar tusks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's the scary one. He's the scariest one for sure.
They're
He's
all
the
scary.
biggest.
I mean,
They're all very scary.
I'm not going to want to run across any of them when I'm out camping.
Definitely not. You're done if that happens. But yeah, I mean, before Mr. O'Dwyer gets there, they've obviously, the troglodytes have figured out that Kurt Russell tricked them with the opium. They figured it out, and they come down. They come in the room, and it's scary, man. It's super scary, and they rip open his cell. They take him out of the cell, and they cut him on the stomach, basically. And then one thing we forgot to mention earlier: after they drank the flask of opium, they threw it in the fire. They threw the flask in the fire, so it's sitting there heating up. They cut him open. They take the flask and they shove it in his cut, and it's a burning flask. It's made out of metal. It's super hot, and so I mean, it's just the brutality of these guys, it's just insane. And they're essentially, to make a long story short, they're about to kill him when Mr. O'Dwyer comes and saves the day. And he comes in and he shoots, he's shooting them and he's killing them, and basically he comes in and takes care of them all. And that's really kind of all you need to know, essentially. Like, the details aren't good. This part, though, at this point, Kurt Russell's done for, though, because he has been shot. And he had that cut. He had the flask inside his cut burning. He's done for. He knows he's not going to make it out of this cave. So there are still a couple of troglodytes left. They don't know where they're at. So he says, I'm going to stay here, and I mean to take out every single one of these guys so you guys can get away. I had a little, I don't want to say a problem, but the goodbye here was not as emotional as I think it would have been in real life. Like, they all kind of look at him like, okay, thanks, bye, and they kind of walk out. And even Chicory kind of just looks at him and is like, okay, bye. Like, it's not, I would imagine they've been through this journey. They've sacrificed so much. They've lost people. They've seen some brutal things. And this guy is sacrificing his life to get everyone out of there. And they just kind of leave. So, I mean, it's not a big deal, but it was enough to me to be like, man, I wanted to see something more. I wanted to see a better send-off for Kurt Russell.
Yeah, I told you Patrick Wilson's an asshole.
He's an asshole, man. You know what? You get someone else to play that role, and they're all hugging each other and trying to drag him out of that thing themselves.
I'm just kidding, Patrick Wilson. I love you, but no, I agree. I think it is. It's not very sentimental. And here's the only combative reply that I might have to that, which is it's 1890s. So
true.
It's just old school West, like you did your thing, I did my thing, we did it together. Let's move on.
Good point. Good. I mean, you just saved the movie for me. Thanks.
So I don't know. I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of that hard nosed kind of like whatever. We were all expecting this to happen. We weren't expecting anything different, so to speak.
Right.
And so, but because I do like Kurt Russell, I wanted to see a little bit more sentimentality towards his death.
Sure.
So Craig Zahler, you're on my list.
Yeah, he's on your list. And then, and basically the end of the movie is Chicory and the O'Dwyers starting to make the long journey home. And I think there were 3 troglodytes left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And to finish it all up, and he says they know where Bright Hope, which is the name of the town they came from. He says they know where Bright Hope is, so I'm gonna take care of the rest of them so they don't come back. And the one thing he does say is something about tell my wife I love her. Yeah, it's actually this is actually pretty sweet because Chicory's wife has died. She died a while ago, not in this movie. Before the movie starts, obviously, and. He says to Chicory, tell my wife I love her, and I'll say hello to your wife.
And I'll say hello to yours, yeah.
It's just a cool, I mean, that was a little sentimental, a little nice, but it's still, I don't know. I wouldn't have complained if they did a little bit more.
I want to know what you wanted. Like, did you want Chicory and Russell to hug and like hug it out? The kiss on the forehead? I don't know
what I wanted. I'm
going to miss you, old pal. Like, what did you want? These are old school cowboys.
They got to go one way or the other. They either got to be stone-faced or they got to be overly sentimental. But it was just kind of flat. It just felt flat. Again, this is me nitpicking over a dumb scene in a movie that I absolutely love. So it didn't ruin the movie for me. It's just, if I'm going to find a fault, that's it. I'm just nitpicking at this point.
Alan wanted Chicory to pull out an old crocheted piece of ornament that said, love forever, and hand it over.
Best friends forever.
Best friends forever. So he could put it over his cut and he could die as the blood seeps through the cloth.
Exactly. Yeah. Steven Seagal would have done that.
I get you. I got you.
But they're walking home. They're walking, starting the long journey home, and you hear 3 gunshots. And that is, we're assuming that's Kurt Russell finishing off the rest of the troglodytes. And then movie ends.
And I do like that. I actually like it is kind of cool too when you hear the 3 gunshots off in the distance, and Chicory kind of has a bit of an expression on his face of satisfaction in the sense that the mission was fully accomplished. I kind of like that,
Yeah, I did too.
My morbid side or my dark side would have been like, let's hear 4.
That's what I was waiting for. Honestly, I was waiting for the 4th shot, and it didn't come. So then the final shot is Chicory throws a stone next to the trail. And we know earlier on they were marking the trail with stones. So it was 1 stone. Earlier they're marking with 4. But is that a symbol that he's still alive? I mean, who knows at this point?
Yeah, it's definitely an open-ended interpretation.
Yeah.
And I personally wanted the 4th one because I'm dark that way.
Me too. Well, me too. I mean, it would have been fitting. But it's just like I also wanted the dynamite explosion, and they didn't give us that either, I don't think.
I thought they did. So now we got a fact check.
I'm gonna have to go back and look.
And it could just be me wanting it, and in my eyes and in my ears, hearing an explosion, even though it never happened.
It could be. I'll just say this: don't tell me there's dynamite and not use it. Just like Hitchcock said, if there's a gun in Act 1, you got to use it by Act 2.
Use the gun.
Yeah, use the gun. Use the dynamite.
I'm with you. Well, this is Bone Tomahawk. This was an exciting film. I mean, this film to me, like I mentioned, has a bit of a slow start, and then in its own way, suddenly things start to pick up, and it really eventually at the end turns into like an unlikely jaw-dropping experience. I liked the metamorphosis. So the concept of Western 20 minutes and then kind of Western and then kind of Western and then all of a sudden, in some ways like a light switch, boom, we're in a horror film. And I like that metamorphosis, and I thought he did it well. Tell me, give me a little bit of a summary for you, just overall impressions watching the film again, and then throw that rating at me.
I love, like I said, I mean, I'm a broken record at this point. I love this movie. I think it's great. I think the casting was phenomenal. Even Patrick Wilson. I know now that you said that, everything I see him in, I'm going to think, oh man, there's that smugness just right under the surface. But I actually liked him in this role. I thought the casting was so good. I thought the chemistry between the cast was done perfectly. They weren't, lighting sparks with the chemistry, but it was confrontational enough and businesslike enough. But there's also that camaraderie there. I just thought it was everything so expertly done. This was Zahler. I don't know how to say his name.
I've been saying Zahler, so let's go with it. And then if I miss it, oh well.
I think this is Zahler's first feature.
Yep.
And I think the writing, he wrote the script. I think the writing is phenomenal. I think the direction is phenomenal. Obviously, I'm going on and on about the sound design. I'm kind of an audiophile, so I really appreciate that. And of course, the performances were fantastic. I love this movie. Just a couple little nitpicking things, knocked it down a little bit, but not even that much. I think I gave Texas Chainsaw a 9. I can't go that high because I don't love it as much as I love Chainsaw. But I think I'm going to go an 8.8 Tinctures of Opium.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. I would say on the legs of that, you need a tincture of opium to watch the movie. I'm just kidding. I just had to. I had to come in
to dull the pain of the brutality.
No, for real, that's exactly what you would need it for. There's a lot of stuff in there, beautifully done. I think the movie also, one thing we didn't talk a whole lot about. I think it's shot really well. And one of the things I was reading about is it was shot in 21 days.
Can you believe that?
So that's really short for a movie kind of this magnitude.
And it's over 2 hours too. And imagine with that shooting schedule, and you're in the elements, and a lot of the shots where these actors are being dragged through the dirt and they're laying in the bushes, and that has to be a really tough shoot.
Yeah, I mean, it's filmed basically in Southern California in the mountains, and it looks like Paramount Ranch, probably somewhere up in Santa Clarita, which is just north of Hollywood. So it's just filmed in Los Angeles. That to me was one thing I didn't love atmospherically, was I wanted, if you're talking Texas and New Mexico, there's definitely a different geographic taste to what those places look like than Southern California. I could tell, having lived there, those were Southern California mountains.
Okay. Yeah, those, I mean, I know that...
That's nitpicky, though.
Sure. I mean, they were looking at New Mexico and Utah as potential locations, too. I do know that. Definitely, obviously, we're from Utah. I know Southern Utah. Definitely not Southern Utah. And it's definitely... You can tell the films that are shot in those places.
But I also think that if you're going to... Look, I mean, there's always that convenience factor. If you're given a budget of $500,000... That's all it was. It was $500,000 from what I'm reading.
I read 1.8 million.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at box office. You're right. 1.8, which it's not a whole lot of money, to be honest.
Especially considering that cast.
One thing that I'm curious about, which as a filmmaker, I'm always trying to, how did he do this? And I know he had written a film before. He had been a screenwriter on a film. Mm-hmm. But his directorial debut, and he pulls in that cast.
How do you do that on $1.8 million too?
But how did he do that? Because the thing is, a lot of these actors, especially these really well-versed, seasoned actors, you have Russell and all these ones we've talked about, they're not usually inclined to work with first-time directors. Or so goes the lore, right? So that to me, props to Craig Zahler for getting such a phenomenal cast, or hiring the right casting director, whatever he did.
Well, and also, I mean, Patrick Wilson, The Conjuring came out in 2013. He was hot in 2015 when this film was made.
Smug as ever.
Smug as ever. But to get him, to get Kurt Russell, to get Richard Jenkins, even though, he's not like a super A-list Brad Pitt style guy, he is a phenomenal actor who's very well known and been in a lot of films. And Matthew Fox, obviously, they may have got him on a discount rate because he's well known for Lost, and I think that ended in like 2008 or 2010 or something.
Yeah, he doesn't, like we said, he hasn't done a whole lot, but we wouldn't mind a little more of Matthew Fox.
Yeah.
This film really, like I said, it's got the slow burn at the beginning, but it kind of picks up. Very intriguing to me to kind of go with the hybrid effect of the Western and the horror. Seems like it'd be very hard to pull off if you were putting this movie together from the start and kind of conceptualizing the idea. You'd say, I'm going to do a horror Western. How do I do that? I think from that perspective, he does a really good job. And I think, like you mentioned, I think the cast's chemistry is good and it's believable. Like the characters feel like they are who they are and that they have some kind of relation in whatever that might be. And so I liked it. I thought it was a good movie. Like I mentioned before, I like the metamorphosis from Western to horror. You went with, what'd you go? Is it 8.8? 8.8. Well, you're going in high.
I'm going in high, man. I love this movie.
I don't think I've ever. We rarely get you in the high eights.
The last little bit, man. We've been doing some good movies. I've enjoyed this, but I think Chainsaw. I think I went with 9. I can't go that high. But like I said, I've seen this movie twice before. As soon as I turned it on this time, I got excited, and I got it put me in a really good mood. As messed up as that sounds.
I hadn't seen the whole thing once through. So what had happened was a few years ago, I was talking to my dad, and my dad's like, there's this movie. I think at the time, I could have sworn it was on Netflix. And he said, or somewhere, some streaming platform. He said, there's this movie called Bone Tomahawk. And my dad's not a gruesome type of guy. He doesn't like that kind of stuff. He's like, it was really good. He's like, it was really dark though.
Yeah, very dark.
And he's like, but it was pretty good. And I remember watching it, and for some reason, I didn't get all the way through it. Of course, this viewing, I watched the whole thing, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good movie, and I'm impressed.
The first time you watched it, did you get to the scene?
I didn't get to the final.
Okay.
It's one of those instances where something comes up and then you don't get back to it. So it wasn't even necessarily like I walked away, just kids or whatever it might have been. But
so this time around, you didn't know what was coming.
Yeah, I didn't know the ending.
Okay, all right.
I didn't know the ending, and that's maybe why I was harping on the beginning, because I had seen it already, and so I was like, okay, been there, done that.
Sure.
But I liked the movie. I really did. I liked the genre classification. Once again, drama, horror, Western. Like it's got all those elements to it. I'm impressed with Zahler's ability. Like always, again, like sometimes they hit it out of the park, sometimes they don't. First-time director nails it, right? So whether you like the story or you love the movie, and I'll get into my rating in just a second, from that filmmaking perspective, the ability to tell a story visually like he's done here on your first go, and the pressure that you must feel to perform with such high-end actors on your first go, very impressive. Very impressive. So his debut feature, I think it feels like a feature from a seasoned veteran in terms of filmmaking. I enjoyed the film. Rotten Tomatoes comes in at 91%. So, yeah, the critics love it. That's the critic score.
That's good.
And
I'm a little surprised.
Audience is at 73. All right, so still certified fresh. Then
I'm surprised there's that much of a discrepancy between the two. It kind of feels like a movie that both critics and audiences could enjoy. Even if they don't love it, I would think they'd be closer together.
Yeah, it never surprises me. I don't know. The critics are always interesting. I don't know how to ever interpret what they do. So the only one I ever
good point.
kind of pay homage or listen to is Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
And partly because it's simple and defined explanation of what his reasoning is. And I always liked that he just kind of simply put it. He'd give an explanation, an overview, and then he'd basically give you his critique and tell you why. And I always liked that. And it was very simple too. It was never convoluted.
I had a lot of respect for him too, because he actually made a film, so he knows what it takes.
True.
You know, it's easy to criticize, but it's not so easy to actually do it.
Absolutely. And then 7.1 out of 10 from IMDb. So that's a pretty good score. I feel like IMDb is always at the 7.
It's always right around there, yeah.
So
no matter what it is.
I'm going to come in at, you had an 8.8. I'm going to come in a little bit lower than you. Is this a film, once again, as you mentioned, is this a film that I would rewatch? The answer is yes. But then the follow-up question is, how many times?
And how much space between viewings do you need?
Exactly, because there are certain movies I can watch over and over again. Other movies that, like you said, you need some spacing. This is probably one of those. But I'm going to come in just a little bit above IMDb. I'm at a 7.5. Wait, what was your
Tinctures of Opium.
Oh, I was almost copied you right there. It started getting late, and I started to go, wait, what did he say?
Well, I thought about that before too. Like, now I've got to the point now where while I'm watching the movie, I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna what is my rating scale gonna be?
I'm gonna go 7.5 bone pipes.
Oh, I like that one.
This AKA screeches.
I like it.
And not screeches like Saved by the Bell screeches. Screeches like...
No one wants more than one of those.
No one wants any of those.
Yeah, we don't even want a full one of those.
Not even Zach and Slater wanted one.
Exactly.
So 7.5 bone pipes. And I feel like that's pretty good. That's kind of that's a little bit, maybe a little bit lower than the other thing is this. One thing I want to say is I looked at his subsequent films. So he did one that I started watching and I'll continue to watch. I'll finish, called Brawl in Cell Block 99 with Vince Vaughn.
What did you think in the little
and so I've seen the first 30 minutes. And once again, it's slow.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know, and I'll finish it and I'll have a better idea. So maybe it starts out, like Bone Tomahawk, where it's just slow and that's his thing. One thing I love is his films definitely have a distinct nature of realism. It's just real.
Yep.
There's no fluffery,
Which I like that. I mean, it's super easy to add all these other elements that remind you that it's a movie, and I respect anyone who can draw you in without needing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not for everybody, and I don't want that in every film I watch. But if someone can do that, that's a lot of talent right there. I will say I have not heard good things about Dragged Across Concrete, which is the third and latest film. I mean, that's just from word of mouth. I don't know, but I've not heard good things.
Well, I'll continue with Brawl in Cell Block 99. And I mean, I think he's also got that bit of and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is basically like a almost, I don't want to say documentary style because it's not a documentary. It's very cinematic, but it's very cinema verite. You're basically feeling like a fly on the wall. You're observing what's happening. It feels like it's actually historical or real.
Yep.
Even though, of
Very
course,
well
it's
said.
a completely made up movie.
Yeah.
Well
said.
I like that he does that. And I like the film overall. So Any last parting words for Bone Tomahawk for the
go
for the
watch
listeners?
it.
Go watch it.
I mean, even if you're not into a lot of violence and stuff, it's not violent throughout the whole thing. There's some hard parts, but I highly recommend this one. I love this movie.
I will second that and tell everybody that listening that you should go check it out. If you don't have a stomach for particular things of violence, there are areas of the film that you're going to want to jump through. But I even still think with that, there's some entertaining factors to it, and it's overall a good story. So go check it out. This is the Tame Aperture podcast, Gabe and Alan, and go check us out at tameaperture.com. Look at our previous episodes. Also give us suggestions on future episodes on things we can watch. I hope you enjoyed listening, and we'll check you next time. Thanks, everybody. Tame Aperture signing out.
The Tame Aperture podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.